The punch came fast, but Keisha saw it before it landed. Years of training had taught her to read the shift in weight, the tensing of shoulders, the flash of intent in hostile eyes. She didn't flinch. Beside her, her twin sister Kendra stood equally still, equally ready. The crowd of students surrounding them in the courtyard held their breath, phones raised, waiting for blood. What none of them understood was that the Johnson twins had been prepared for this moment their entire lives. Their father, a former Marine, had spent countless hours teaching them not just how to fight, but when to fight. Today, that line had finally been crossed. 2 weeks earlier, the autumn air in Charleston carried the scent of magnolias as the twins walked through the iron gates of Riverside Preparatory for the first time. The sprawling campus, with its colonial architecture and manicured lawns, spoke of old money and older traditions. Keisha adjusted her backpack, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking their movement across the quad. Kendra's hand found hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement that they were entering hostile territory together. Riverside Prep had stood for over a century, educating the children of Charleston's elite. The student body was a tapestry of privilege, woven almost entirely from white threads. The twins' arrival marked a disruption to that carefully maintained pattern. Their scholarships, earned through exceptional academics, might have granted them access to the building, but not to the community within it. The first whispers started before they reached their lockers. Keisha caught fragments of conversations that fell silent as they passed, only to resume in hushed tones behind them. Kendra's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. Their father had warned them about this. He'd sat them down the night before, his weathered hands folded on the kitchen table, and told them what to expect. Not to scare them, but to prepare them. "People will test you," he'd said, his voice carrying the gravity of experience. "They'll try to make you feel small, unwelcome, less than. But you're not there for their approval. You're there to learn, to grow, to prove nothing to anyone but yourselves. Remember your training. Control your breath, control your mind, control the situation." By lunchtime on that first day, the testing had begun. Tyler Bradford, quarterback and unofficial king of Riverside Prep, held court at the center table in the cafeteria. His sandy hair fell perfectly across his forehead, his smile was practiced charm, and his cruelty was instinctive. When Keisha and Kendra entered with their trays, his voice rose above the cafeteria noise. "Looks like they're diversifying the help," he announced, loud enough for the entire room to hear. His companions, Ethan Pierce and Luke Morrison, erupted in laughter. Other students glanced away, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. Kendra's grip on her tray whitened her knuckles, but Keisha touched her elbow gently. They found an empty table near the windows and sat down, ignoring the performance behind them. This was the first lesson their father had taught them. Don't give bullies the reaction they crave, but silence, they would soon learn, only works for so long. The provocations escalated daily. Books knocked from hands in crowded hallways, whispered slurs that teachers somehow never heard, deliberate shoulder checks that sent Kendra stumbling into lockers. The twins absorbed it all, maintaining the discipline their father had drilled into them during years of martial arts training in their garage gym. Every evening, they would return home to find him waiting, and they would train. Kicks, blocks, strikes, grappling. But more than physical technique, he taught them control. "Anyone can throw a punch," he would say, guiding their forms, "but it takes real strength to hold back when you have the power to strike. That's what I'm teaching you. Not violence, but restraint. Not aggression, but defense." Keisha and Kendra had earned their black belts 2 years prior, but their father continued their education. He taught them to recognize the signs of an impending attack, to position themselves strategically, to never let anger cloud their judgment. He also taught them to document everything, to speak up, to seek help through proper channels first. They tried. Keisha reported the incidents to Vice Principal Anderson. a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who listened with half his attention while shuffling papers. "Boys will be boys," he'd said dismissively. "Maybe you're being too sensitive." Riverside has a reputation for spirited competition. Perhaps you're misinterpreting normal teenage behavior. Kendra tried talking to Ms. Harrison, the guidance counselor, who offered platitudes about finding common ground and not making waves. "You're new here," she'd said with a patronizing smile. "Give it time. Try to fit in better, fit in, as if the problem was their inability to assimilate rather than the hostility surrounding them." The breaking point came on a Friday morning. Keisha arrived at her locker to find it spray-painted with a racial slur so vile she couldn't bring herself to say it aloud. Beside it, crude drawings mocked her appearance. Red paint dripped down like blood, pooling on the polished floor. Students gathered, some gasping, most filming, a few laughing. Tyler stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing a smirk that confirmed his involvement. Kendra arrived moments later, her own locker similarly defaced. The sisters stood side by side, staring at the hatred literally painted before them. Keisha felt her heartbeat in her ears, felt her hands curl into fists. She glanced at Kendra and saw her own rage reflected back. But they didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing them break. Instead, they began methodically documenting everything with their phones, taking photos from multiple angles, recording the crowd's reactions, capturing Tyler's satisfied expression. When Principal Blackwell finally arrived, summoned by a nervous teacher, he looked at the vandalism with what seemed like genuine dismay. "This is unacceptable," he declared, loud enough for the gathered students to hear. "We will investigate thoroughly." The investigation lasted less than a day. Despite clear video evidence that multiple students had filmed, despite Tyler's obvious presence at the scene, despite the paint still fresh on his hands when security finally thought to check, the conclusion was maddeningly predictable, insufficient evidence to determine the perpetrator. Tyler and his friends received a stern talking to. Keisha and Kendra were told to move past it. That evening, sitting across from their father at the dinner table, the twins recounted everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied them both carefully. "You've shown remarkable restraint," he said finally. "You've done everything right, followed every rule, sought help through proper channels, and the system has failed you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What happens next is your choice. You can transfer schools. I'll support that decision completely. Or you can stay and face this. But if you stay, understand that they won't stop. They'll keep pushing until they force a confrontation." Keisha and Kendra looked at each other, that twin connection passing wordless understanding between them. They'd never backed down from a challenge in their lives. They wouldn't start now. "We stay," Keisha said firmly. "Then we prepare," their father replied. "Because when that confrontation comes, and it will come, you'll need to be ready, not just physically but legally and emotionally. From now on, document everything, record every incident. Make sure you're never alone if possible. And remember, if you must defend yourselves, do so only when you have no other choice, and use only the minimum force necessary." The weekend became an intensive training session. Their father pushed them harder than ever, drilling them on defensive techniques, de-escalation strategies, and most importantly, situational awareness. Sunday evening, he sat them down one final time. "If it comes to physical confrontation, here's what you need to understand," he said gravely. "The system is not set up in your favor. They will try to blame you, to paint you as the aggressors, regardless of the truth. So you must be smarter, more controlled, more documented than they are. Fight only if you have no choice. Win decisively, but don't injure unnecessarily. And the moment it's over, the moment they're no longer a threat, you stop." Understood. They understood. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Keisha and Kendra walked through Riverside's gates with their heads high, their movements measured. Other students noticed the change immediately, a subtle shift in their bearing that spoke of resolution rather than resignation. Tyler noticed too. He stood in the main courtyard with Ethan and Luke, watching the twins approach. The confrontation was inevitable, orchestrated by Tyler's need to reassert dominance after the weekend's silence. As the twins crossed the quad, he stepped directly into their path, forcing them to stop. Students began gathering immediately, forming a loose circle, phones already recording. "You should have stayed away," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "This school isn't for people like you." Keisha met his eyes without flinching. "People like us? You mean students who actually earned their place here?" The crowd reacted with sharp intakes of breath. Tyler's face flushed red. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not in front of his kingdom. Ethan stepped forward, attempting to intimidate with his size. "Watch your mouth," Ethan growled, moving into Keisha's space. Kendra shifted slightly, positioning herself to cover her sister's flank. Their training made the movement instinctive. Tyler caught the subtle repositioning and recognized it for what it was: preparation. It enraged him further. "You think you're tough?" he spat, shoving Keisha hard in the shoulder. The shove was a mistake. It was the line their father had warned about, the moment when defense became justified. Keisha absorbed the force, letting it dissipate through her body rather than resisting it. Her training had taught her how to read the energy behind an attack, to use it rather than oppose it. "Don't touch me again," Keisha said quietly, her voice steady. Tyler laughed, a harsh bark of derision. He shoved her again, harder this time. Beside him, Luke moved toward Kendra, attempting to grab her backpack. What happened next unfolded with the precision of choreography, but with the authenticity of genuine skill. Keisha sidestepped Tyler's third shove, her movement fluid and economical. His momentum carried him forward off balance. She didn't strike him. She simply wasn't where he expected her to be. He stumbled, confusion replacing arrogance on his face. Kendra, meanwhile, had twisted away from Luke's grip with a simple wrist technique, redirecting his force and causing him to overextend. He reached for her again, more aggressively, and she executed a textbook defensive block followed by a controlled push that sent him backward onto the grass. The crowd erupted in shouts. Tyler, humiliated by his failed attack, charged at Keisha with real violence in his eyes. This time, she had no choice. As he swung wildly, she ducked low, caught his extended arm, and used his own momentum to guide him past her and into the ground. The technique was pure Aikido, using an attacker's force against them, requiring no strikes, just redirection and control. Ethan, seeing his friends on the ground, made the critical mistake of escalating further. He grabbed Kendra from behind, attempting to restrain her. In one smooth motion, she dropped her weight, broke his grip, pivoted, and swept his legs. He went down hard, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. The entire encounter lasted perhaps 30 seconds. When it ended, Tyler, Ethan, and Luke lay on the ground, dazed and defeated. Keisha and Kendra stood over them, breathing steadily, not a hair out of place. The crowd stood in shocked silence, the only sound, the continuous recording of dozens of phones. Vice Principal Anderson arrived moments later, pushing through the crowd. He took in the scene. 3 male students on the ground, 2 female students standing calmly, and an audience of witnesses with their phones out. "What happened here?" he demanded, though his tone suggested he'd already decided. Tyler scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "They attacked us!" he shouted, pointing accusingly. "For no reason." The lie was so blatant, so obviously contradicted by the evidence, that several students actually laughed. Anderson's eyes swept the crowd, landing on the forest of phones. "Everyone, put those away," he ordered. "This is a private school matter." But the videos were already uploading, already spreading beyond his control. Anderson turned to the twins. "You two, come with me. You three as well," he added, gesturing at Tyler and his friends. In Principal Blackwell's office, the scene played out exactly as their father had predicted. Tyler claimed victimhood, insisting the twins had attacked without provocation. Ethan and Luke backed his story, their rehearsed lies falling apart under the weight of contradictory details. Principal Blackwell, a silver-haired man who'd led Riverside for 2 decades, looked tired. "This is a serious situation," he began. "Violence of any kind cannot be tolerated." "We defended ourselves," Keisha interrupted calmly. "Tyler shoved me twice. Luke attempted to grab my sister. We used the minimum force necessary to stop their attacks. Everything is on video, from multiple angles, filmed by at least 20 students." Blackwell's jaw tightened. He knew about the videos. They were already circulating online, already being shared with commentary about bullying and racial harassment. The footage clearly showed Tyler as the aggressor, clearly showed the twins defending themselves with remarkable restraint. "Nevertheless," Blackwell said carefully, "I'm suspending all of you pending a full investigation. It was a coward's compromise, treating victims and aggressors as equally culpable. But Keisha and Kendra had expected this. They'd prepared for this." "We'll be retaining legal counsel," Kendra said quietly, "and we'll be filing formal complaints not just about today's assault, but about weeks of documented racial harassment that this administration has ignored." The room temperature seemed to drop. Tyler's face went pale. Blackwell's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. That evening, the twins' father made several phone calls. First to a civil rights attorney he'd served with years ago, then to local media outlets, then to the school board. By morning, the story had exploded beyond Riverside's carefully controlled gates. The videos went viral, watched millions of times across social platforms. News crews appeared at the school. Parents demanded answers. The school board launched an independent investigation, and Tyler's family, wealthy and connected as they were, found themselves facing questions they couldn't deflect with money or influence. The investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, more students came forward, sharing their own experiences of Tyler's bullying, of the administration's indifference, of a culture that protected perpetrators while silencing victims. The evidence became overwhelming, undeniable. When the school board finally released its findings, the verdict was clear. Tyler Bradford, Ethan Pierce, and Luke Morrison were expelled permanently. Vice Principal Anderson was placed on administrative leave. Principal Blackwell announced his early retirement, and Keisha and Kendra's suspensions were not only lifted, but officially apologized for. The twins returned to Riverside Prep to a transformed environment. Not everyone welcomed them. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, but the balance of power had shifted. Other students nodded respectfully in the hallways. Teachers paid attention when they spoke up. And the administration, now under new leadership, implemented comprehensive anti-bullying and diversity training. 3 months after that day in the courtyard, Keisha stood at a school assembly, addressing the entire student body. Her voice was steady, her message clear. "What happened to me and my sister wasn't unique," she said. "It happens every day, in schools everywhere, to students who look different, sound different, come from different backgrounds. The difference is, we had the training to defend ourselves and the documentation to prove our case. But we shouldn't have needed either. A school should be a place where everyone feels safe, where differences are celebrated, not attacked, where the system protects the vulnerable instead of the powerful." The applause that followed was genuine, sustained. Kendra, sitting in the front row, caught her sister's eye and smiled. Their father, standing in the back of the auditorium, watched with quiet pride. That evening, as they trained together in their garage gym, he paused to watch them spar. Their movements had grown even more refined, their control even more precise. But more than their technical skill, he was proud of their moral courage, their refusal to be diminished, their insistence on justice even when the cost was high. "You know," he said, stopping their session, "I taught you how to fight, but you taught yourselves something more important. How to fight for what's right. That's not something that can be trained. That comes from character." Keisha and Kendra exchanged glances, that twin connection sparking understanding. They'd faced hatred and emerged stronger. They'd been tested and refused to break. They'd demanded change and achieved it. The journey had been brutal, but the destination made it worthwhile. Months turned into a year. Riverside Prep continued its transformation, becoming a more inclusive, more aware institution. Tyler and his friends faced legal consequences, community service, and the lasting stain of their actions. The twins excelled academically, earning recognition not just for their courage, but for their scholarship. When college acceptance letters arrived, both sisters had multiple options from prestigious universities. But more important than any acceptance was the message they'd sent, that silence enables oppression, that documentation defeats denial, and that sometimes, when every other option has been exhausted, standing up means standing your ground. Their story spread beyond Charleston, beyond social media, becoming a teaching moment about bullying, racism, and the power of preparation meeting opportunity. Schools began using their case as an example, discussing not just the physical confrontation, but the weeks of documentation, the attempts to work through proper channels, the measured response when defense became necessary. Years later, both sisters would become advocates for bullying prevention and self-defense education. They would share their father's lessons about control, about using force only as a last resort, about the difference between aggression and protection. They would teach others that strength isn't about domination, but about the courage to stand firm when everything pushes you to fall. But on that autumn evening in Charleston, as the sun set over the magnolia trees and the twins finished their training, they simply enjoyed the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. They'd walked through fire and emerged forged stronger. They'd faced a system designed to break them and instead broken through it. And they'd proven that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponents, but refusing to become what they expected you to be.